Hey everyone, welcome to another Speed Secrets podcast. Today's guest is the Mayor of Hinchtown, James Hinchcliffe. Welcome, James. Thanks for taking the time for joining me here.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, I'm curious, how did the whole Mayor of Hinchtown thing even start?
Well, that's a great question. It started in a basement of an office in Ludington, Michigan, over a case of Miller Lite, if I'm honest with you,
Uh-huh.
as most good ideas do. And basically, what happened was I was kind of just going, I think, into my first season of Atlantic. And it was kind of that time when all drivers had websites. And so I was sitting with, two guys who kind of helped me very much in the off track side and the business side of the sport when I was young. And they said, look, it's time to do a website. And we went on all the different drivers' websites that were existing. And remember, this was still kind of, the infancy of personal websites for, athletes or whatever. And so we went on every IndyCar driver, NASCAR driver, Formula One driver, all their websites. And we came to two conclusions. One, they were all exactly the same. And two, they all sucked.
Right.
And so we sat there and brainstormed something that would stand out and be a little different. And the idea of making the website a town and having each, section of the website kind of be mocked after a part of a town, and me sort of being the de facto mayor, it sort of came to light there. And the first little bit, I mean, everyone didn't really understand it, and frankly, neither did we. We were just sort of figuring it out as we went. Yeah. But now it's really kind of caught on, and I think I get introduced as the Mayor of Hinchtown as much, if not more, than I do James Hinchcliffe. So
Yeah.
I guess it worked.
Yeah, well, sorry about that, I guess. But more importantly, how many beer into this were you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not entirely sure.
Well, there's a point where you lose track, I guess. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of those kinds of things, and the podcast that you and Alex Rossi do, I enjoyed that, and Tim, I guess. I don't know. How much is a photo of Alex at the gangly age of 14 used to you as a bartering tool? Because I have one, I have a few of them.
Oh, I want everything and anything you've got. That's always good ammunition for me.
Yeah.
I was actually at a Formula BMW reunion after the Laguna Seca IndyCar race last year, and somebody had put together some sort of photo album with pictures going back to the first year, and I found a couple of, I don't know exactly how old he was at that point, maybe a year or two older than that, but if you've got some from 14, I'm all about it.
Yeah, so I think at the time, he and his dad told us that that was the first time that he drove a race car. I put him in a 3-day program. It was actually at Mission Raceway outside Vancouver. You can ask him about that. Ask him
I
about
will.
that. Yeah.
I will.
Yeah. So, hey, I'm curious. I mean, you're kind of in a weird season. We're all in a weird season. But what's your fun meter pointing at these days when you get into a race car? Like, are you still enjoying it as much as you always have, more than you always have, less than you always have? I'm just curious.
Yeah, honestly, it's out of 10, and I would say that I'm enjoying it more this year than I have the last few, for a variety of reasons. Like you say, 2020 is weird for everyone. 2020 was going to be weird for me regardless.
Yeah.
I had already sort of been lined up to have a bit of an awkward season, and with a 3-race deal with Andretti Autosport, but being back at the racetrack and being back with a team, that I had a history with from earlier in the decade and had some success with, an awesome new partner in Genesys coming on board this year. It really did kind of breathe some fresh life, back into the sport for me a little bit. And, I enjoy what we're doing on track and what we're doing off track more than I have in a long time. So it's nice to know that, even going through the deal that I did at the end of last year with, not having my contract honored by the team and kind of being out of a full-time ride, knowing that I still wanted to do it bad enough. And, I fought to get back in. And when I did, it was all worth it, and it's just reaffirmed for me that my driving days definitely aren't done. And I'm working hard on being back full-time next year.
Well, it's, I had a point in my career where I was just so focused on getting to that next level and doing that next thing that I stopped having fun, or I forgot to have fun. And It wasn't until I kind of stopped and asked myself, why am I doing this? And I realized that I drove better. Have you had any of that kind of maybe you've never had that struggle? I don't know.
No, for sure. I have. I think a lot of drivers have, and it's so easy to get caught up in, everything else that goes into being able to go and be a racing driver. I think as Jackie Stewart famously said, you got to be 80% businessman, 20% racing driver, and these days that's truer than ever. And you're public figures, and with social media, you're at the beck and call of the entire world at all times, and eyes are on you at all times, and all the ancillary stuff that comes along with being a professional racer. It can get a bit tedious, and it can get a bit taxing and exhausting, and then you don't enjoy the driving side as much. But when you sort of recalibrate your mind and not think of oh, this is all the stuff that I have to do in order to be a racing driver, and you think of it more as, hey, if I do this stuff, I get to go drive race cars for a living.
Right.
It really, you just gotta adjust your sort of, your outlook on all that extra stuff. And I've had to do that in the past. And certainly, this year and this sort of 8-month stretch for me has been very eye opening and humbling. And it really has brought me back to a good place.
I'm curious what your thoughts are, and maybe this is getting just a little bit too deep, but for this show anyways. Why is it that we love doing this? You ever thought about that? Like, it's pretty stupid in some ways. We just drive around in circles or squiggly circles and come back to the same place. And you ever wonder why, like, we actually enjoy doing this?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of people ask me that. I make the joke that racing drivers are really good at getting from point A back to point A. We don't even get to a point B.
Right.
And yeah, it does seem a bit of a redundant exercise, but I think it's a combination of two things. I think that every racing driver is inherently a competitor first and foremost. I don't know one driver that isn't just absurdly competitive in anything and everything else that they do. It's just sort of ingrained in you. And if they weren't drivers, they'd be competing in something else, whether it was another sport or taking that competitive fire to business or, whatever it is. And then you mix that competitive spirit with someone who is fortunate enough to get the opportunity to try driving something at the limit and understanding that challenge. Taking this inanimate object and essentially connecting to it in a way that makes, the two of you this living being that you have to manipulate, this thing that's got so much more power than you have. It's got, the weight, this thing can kill you, and you're trying to control it on the edge. And then you add the thrill of just getting to do that, even by yourself, with the thrill of competition and the drive that I think us athletes have. I think that's why we do it. That's why, we're able to overlook how redundant it is driving in circles in the grand scheme of things and accept the risks that we take to do it, because the feeling of driving a car on the edge is incredible. And the feeling of doing that better than anybody else on that day is almost inexplicable.
So are you more I want to be the fastest guy, or I don't care how fast I am, I just want to be in front at the end?
Yeah, I'm very much a guy that just wants to win. And I know that you don't have to be first at every practice session to do that. I know that some guys just want to hammer the competition mentally and just be quickest in every session, and try to assume that if you're quickest in practice 1, 2, 3 in qualifying, that everyone else is just going to give up going into the race and sort of accept that you're going to beat them. The problem is the IndyCar grid these days is just so stacked with such capable drivers and people that will not give up. And if anything, putting that big of a target on your back pushes them to be better and do better. So sometimes that might not actually be the best approach. But no, for me, it's always about setting myself up for the lap. The first lap of the weekend, I'm thinking about the last lap of the race.
Uh-huh.
And what do I have to do through my preparation? Where do I have to get my car to make sure I can be right in qualifying, to put myself at the right part of the grid, to be in the right spot for the race, and be there at the end. I'm very much a long shot, bigger picture kind of guy.
Unlike Gilles Villeneuve, who could care less about that. He just wanted to win every lap.
Right.
Yeah. Who had a bit of an influence on probably both of us, anyways.
For sure.
Yeah. How Canadian are you still?
Very.
Good.
Yeah, I try and get back as much as I can, and my heroes are still Jill and Greg
Yeah.
and Jacques. I grew up watching all those guys, and I got to bang wheels with PT, which was pretty cool in my first season of IndyCar racing, and it's and it's still a big goal of mine, as my career pivots in the future. And it's already started, but it's giving back to the Canadian racing community and trying to encourage and help young drivers. I'm a partner in a management company called Speed Group, and
Yeah.
we're actually working with a few young Canadians right now. And I've always wanted to give back, and it starts at the karting. It starts at the grassroots, the karting level. And in my future, I definitely want to try to wrangle some of the corporate relationships that I've built over the years, and try to get some of that money flowing back into the grassroots and into karting, and establish something great in Canada that just kind of helps develop talent. Because for a relatively small country population wise, we pump out a fair amount of very talented racing drivers, and I want to keep that tradition alive.
Yeah. Everybody thinks that all we do is play hockey.
Yeah.
Have you ever played hockey?
We do a lot of that, to be fair.
Yeah, yeah. But have you ever played? Did you?
You know what? No.
Yeah.
No, I started karting at 9, and so what's interesting. So I grew up, in a British household because my dad is from England, and so my dad wasn't a hockey fan. And growing up, my dad was a racing fan. So from literally as far back as I can remember, so my earliest memories, quite literally, of life are, sitting in front of my TV on Sunday mornings watching Formula One, and Sunday afternoons watching IndyCar, and going to the IndyCar race in Toronto as a kid. Those are literally some of my earliest memories ever. And it wasn't until I was, 9, 10, 12 years old when I realized all my friends were playing hockey. But by that point, I was already deep into karting, and I never wanted to play a sport where I could potentially get hurt in a way that would keep me out of a go-kart. And so I just kind of abandoned everything else and just focused on karting.
Yeah, and I thought I was the only Canadian that never played hockey, so good to know. So, anyways,
Yeah.
I think we've covered all the hockey that we need to for this episode. So, hey, and obviously you are extremely good on TV. Do you see yourself there doing that in the future more?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the goal. I mean, I've been incredibly lucky, in my career to have some really cool opportunities to try that side of the sport. And it all started, back when I was racing in the Atlantic Series. The international broadcast for Champ Car at the time was a one-man show hosted by this guy called Jeremy Shaw. So there was the domestic feed, which would play in North America basically, and then everywhere else in the world was taking the same pictures, but it was announced by this guy Jeremy Shaw, and he would invite people into the booth, to help him cover a segment or two, drivers, team owners, whoever. And one day after the Atlantic race in Houston, he said, "Hey, do you want to come into the booth for 10 minutes and chat for a bit about the race?" And I said, "Yeah, cool." So I got there before the start of the Champ Car race, and I throw on my headset, and the producer comes in my ear and says, "All right, in 10 seconds, we're live to 170 countries. Don't swear." and so we get through sort of the first segment, which was, all I was really supposed to be there for. And Jeremy looked over at me when we went to commercial, and he goes, "Hey, do you want to stick around for another one?" And I thought, yeah, I got nothing to do. Why not?
Wow.
And I ended up staying for the whole race. And at the end of the race, he said, "What are you doing next week?" And so for the rest of the season, I would finish my Atlantic race, I'd get changed, and I'd run to the booth and help Jeremy with the international broadcast. And then the following year, they actually hired me to do it. And it was just, I had friends that were doing, broadcasting or journalism, and, they were older than I was and just out of school, and they were still, the interns fetching coffee for people. And here I was on an international broadcast to 170 countries calling, analyst role. It was crazy. Like, I had no business being there. I had no right to be in that position, but it gave me some awesome exposure, and it gave me some incredible experience. And so, yeah, I've kind of tried to keep my foot in that, and, knowing that that's something that drivers can kind of transition to post driving. And obviously with my situation this year, I've now been able to establish a great relationship with NBC and kind of see how it works on the inside from those guys' perspective. And yeah, that's it's still hopefully a few years away, but it's a great opportunity and something I definitely want to do more of in the future.
So they did that with me one time at an IMSA race, asked me to come in the booth and talk, and I was so bad that I never got invited back. So that's the difference. So.
That's funny. I always just looked at it as, yeah, it was two guys talking about racing.
Yeah,
I would do that for free. I would just do that anyway. So I don't know. I guess I was lucky. It sort of came naturally to me in that sense.
Do you want me to bleep out that free part, that you would do it for free, just in case somebody's listening?
At the time, I would have.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. Hey, let's talk a little bit about driving technique. And question for you is, did you have a aha moment in terms of, oh, when I do that, the car does this, and like sort of the next level of understanding what you're driving, or was it so incremental through your career from karting all the way up, or did you have sort of one of those big aha moments?
I think there were sort of two moments that I remember from my early Formula car days that really stand out. So I did all my sort of driver training at the Bridgestone Racing Academy up at Motorsport, in Ontario there.
Was that when the Goodmans were running it, or?
That's correct. Yeah. And so Brett Goodman put me in a car well before I was, I think, actually legally allowed to do it. God bless him. And I have, there was a lot. Obviously, I learned a ton there, and that was an incredible education and a great place to do it, a great safe environment to do it. And so basic stuff happened there, but I remember I was doing, so I graduated from that series, and I was I had signed on to do a season of Formula Ford, on the Ontario Ford Championship with AIM Autosport. And AIM at the time had a Formula Renault 2.0 car because the Fran-Am Championship was still around.
Yeah.
And we were doing a test at Shannonville, and they said, well, hey, why don't you do a half day in the Ford and do a half day in the Renault and just get a chance to try it? And I said, yeah, that'd be awesome. So it was my first time in a wings and slicks car. And that was the first time I experienced downforce. And, I remember there was a sort of longish left-hand corner, and it was the first time I had ever felt the feeling of, keeping your foot firmer on the throttle actually made the car feel more stable and have more grip. Mm-hmm. And it was such a counterintuitive thing for someone that had been racing, go-karts and Formula 1600. It was just so backwards. And I'll never forget that feeling of pushing the throttle down and feeling the car just suck down to the ground. And for the first time understanding how downforce worked, that was a big moment for me. But that was just a half day. I was still doing Ford at the time. And then when I went to Formula BMW, we were doing a test there. And, somebody was trying to explain to me, I was having some trouble on the brakes and kind of getting the entry speed right. And they're like, no, you've got to keep that weight on the front of the car, and it'll make the car feel so much better. I was just popping off the brake, and I had tons of understeer, and, the car was just terrible. And the first time that I was kind of brave enough to push that entry and really leave my foot on the brake, do a bit of trail braking, keep that weight transfer to the front, it just transformed the feeling of the car for me. And it was my first real introduction to weight transfer in a wings and slicks car. Obviously you deal a lot with that in a Formula Ford, but they're so soft and they roll a lot in comparison. And so those were two moments that I really started to kind of figure out the mechanics, and the dynamics of a race car.
So I was listening to something the other day, and they were specifically talking about F1, and why is it that a guy like Alex Albon doesn't look at Verstappen's data and just go, well, I'm just going to go and do that, or Bottas looking at Hamilton's data and go, well, I'm just going to go and do that. And obviously, between some of them, between Bottas and Hamilton, often it's barely a tenth of a second,
less than a tenth, yeah.
Yeah, but when they're looking at it, why is it that some of those guys, as a teammate, and you've had some incredibly fast teammates, have you ever had that moment where you're looking at their data and going, I just can't do that, or I didn't think to do that?
I've had both. Certainly, over the years, I think everybody's had moments like that, and that's what makes racing so cool. Is I know there's certain sections of certain racetracks where if you're on a team of 3 cars, 4 cars, you look at this section, you'll see the split report and be like, okay, we're pretty close there, within 100th or 2 to a teammate, and then you look at the data and see how they got their time versus how you got your time, and it is complete opposite philosophies. and you see cars go out with completely different setup philosophies on, and two different drivers will take it to within the same tenth of a second. So much of it comes down to what your preference is as a driver in terms of where you find your time in the corner, how you like to set the car up. And so sometimes there's just going to be advantages to one type of driving style or setup style, and then sometimes it'll be the other way around. The only thing, I'm trying to think of, a comparable analogy in sports, and the only thing off the top of my head I can sort of think of is tennis players play on multiple different surfaces, right?
Yeah.
And some people are clay court experts or grass court experts, and for some reason, whatever reason, their record on that type of court is just way higher. Why don't they just play that well on a clay court as they do on a grass court? It's sometimes just not their style that suits that type of thing. So a certain type of corner or a certain type of track might just suit a driver's style better than another. And it's so hard to replicate sometimes because you're talking about some of the best in the world. You're not at a race school and equal equipment and just all learning. And it's like, yeah, I just need to take that next step. You're up against some of the best drivers in existence, and it's sometimes hard to match them.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the word style, and I was talking to Mike Zemicki. Do you know Mike?
I know Mike very well, yeah.
Yeah. So we were talking about style, driving style, and we were kind of saying, it's interesting that the drivers that have a style aren't consistently winners as much as the ones that, like, what is Scott Dixon's style? Whatever it takes. Like, he's just so good at everything.
Right.
And maybe it's that ability to adapt.
Yeah, I mean, I think adaptation is the single most important skill you can have as a driver, because things change constantly. I mean, we operate in a world of constant variability. It's lap to lap, corner to corner. Your tires wear a little bit, the track grips up a little bit, your fuel load goes down a little bit, the temperature changes a little bit. There are literally no two laps that are the same. And so being able to adjust on the fly, I think, is monumentally important. And, then you take it to a bigger step and think, yeah, being able to drive around and balance in the car is monumentally important, because until a pit stop, you don't get the chance to change it. And even then, the changes are pretty limited that you can do. And so for sure, the drivers that can learn how to get a lap time out of a loose car, out of a car that's a little bit pushy, just like you say, be more versatile in that sense, are ultimately going to be the ones that are, consistently winning and consistently fighting for championships.
And even their level of aggression, patience, that kind of thing. You have some drivers, and you mentioned PT Paul Tracy earlier, and Paul, he had a style.
He did. Checkers or wreckers.
Yeah. But again, you look at Dixon, and there are times when he is as aggressive as anybody, and then other times where he's just a little more patient. You go, what was that? I think it was last year, Road America, was it, where on the first lap I got tangled up and went off in turn 5, back of the pack, and I remember turning to my wife and saying, "You watch, he'll be in the top 5 at the end of the race," and he was.
That was probably the most impressive drive. Alex Rossi won that race by 30 seconds or something. I think Scott Dixon's drive was more impressive.
Yeah,
it was unreal what he did there. And actually, and then you look at his drive at Road America in 2017. That was in the manufacturer kit era, where at that moment Chevy had a tremendous advantage over Honda, and the 4 Penske cars locked out the first 2 rows, and Scott systematically drove through and around all of them and won that race. And it wasn't a lucky yellow. It wasn't he beat them in the pits. He just outdrove them that day when they had such an advantage. I remember watching that race, and I still to this day think that's Scott Dixon's most impressive victory, which is a hard thing to nail down, because he's had so many of them, and so many of them have been so freaking good. But no, you're right. I mean, just being able to overcome anything and everything is what Scott's real strength is.
And I've pointed the finger at Jimmy Johnson in NASCAR as a guy that people go, or you look at it and go, what is his style? Whatever it takes, and that's why he's won so many championships. I always say Kyle Busch for many years had one style, and how many championships, right? So that ability to adapt, I think, is just so huge, and I think it goes back to what you were talking, even with there are some cars where you do need to almost pop your foot off the brake pedal, and others you need to long, slow brake release, or that corner rewards that and not another one. So, uh, when did that hit you, or again, was that just something that kind of naturally creeped up on you that I got to adapt to this?
I think I was really lucky when I was young because in the span of a pretty short amount of time, I got to drive a bunch of different cars. And so, I drove Formula 1600 cars. I got to do that test in a Renault car. I did some vintage racing. I drove, obviously the school cars, the Formula BMW car. I did a test in actually did a race in a Mazda RX-8 GT car, and at that point you're still a sponge, right? You haven't necessarily developed any preconceived notions about anything or bad habits or anything like that. And I'm a student, right? So I'll be the first to admit that if you just put me and driver X, pick a guy, out on a racetrack for the first run of a day, there's a chance that I'll be a tenth or two slower, but I am very good at being analytical, looking at what I'm doing wrong and what I can do better, and improving in those areas. Like when I first sat in a go-kart, I was awful. I finished last in every race of my first season karting. But every race I got a little bit better. And I remember the first race that I didn't get lapped by the leader. It was about mid-season. And, and I just wanted to keep getting better and better and better. And I did. And then I kept thinking about it and working on it even over the winter. And I ended up winning my first race of my second year. So I've always been one of those guys that likes to look at information, loves to look at data and improve on it.
Well, I'm sure we both have seen, I've certainly seen a lot of young drivers who come in and they win their first race and they win a bunch of first races, and then they don't have that same desire, passion, need to keep learning, and they kind of flatten out.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like a work ethic in a sense.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the right word, but it kind of makes sense. I had to work very hard to be quick where others didn't. And that will carry you to a certain point, sure. But at some point, as you get further up the motorsports ladder, the relative talent gets just better and better and better. And at some point, you're going to come across somebody that's just as talented as you, but also works harder than you, and you will be beaten. And you see it a lot. You see the guys that cruise through the junior formula, and they get to either the lights level, or sometimes it takes until you get to the IndyCar level, and they just really struggle at that level because of the amount of work it takes and how hard you have to try and how much you have to be willing to, look at your own faults and improve on your own performance. And so, so kind of going back to your question, I mean, for me, it was that sort of first 2 years of my car driving career. I drove a bunch of different things and had to learn a bunch of different techniques to be quick in all those various cars. And learning was always my way of doing it anyway. So it kind of all came together, at that time, I think.
So if you look at the IndyCar grid right now, is there somebody there that you go, whoa, that's just incredible talent that they have also worked hard at developing?
Apart from the obvious ones, right? Like everybody that's an established guy. So kind of looking back at maybe some of the younger guys coming up, Colton Herta's, the difference in his 2019 season to his 2020 season is like night and day in a very positive way. You look at 2019, comes out of the gates, youngest winner in IndyCar history, backs it up with a lights to flag victory at Laguna Seca. And then you look at every race in between that, and that was a normal rookie season. Outside of those two events where he was exceptional, he had this very normal rookie season of inconsistent speed, a lot of mistakes, a lot of DNFs. And then you come into 2020, and he has been regularly the quickest Andretti car. Almost every race, he's been the highest finishing, and he's finished fourth, fifth, sixth in almost every race of the season.
Yeah.
Obviously he took the win race 2 at Mid-Ohio, but he's just been super consistent and taking those fourth, fifth, sixth place finishes, not forcing the issue, not having unforced errors. So that's a kid that looked at what he did wrong. I mean, he won 2 races last season. One of them was a double points race as the last race. So he essentially won 3 races, and he didn't win Rookie of the Year to a guy that had 1 podium.
Yeah.
And that just shows you how inconsistent his season was. And I imagine that probably haunted him all off season, and he spent a lot of time working on it. And I've been very, very impressed with how he's sort of matured in his driving. I mean, he's just as quick as he was. We saw that at Mid-Ohio. He didn't have to calm down the speed at all, but he just understands how long these races are, how much can change. If you get a bad start or you have a bad first stint, it's not the end of the world. You don't have to overdrive your way back to the front, because that just leads to those mistakes. He just keeps his head calm. He lets the race come to him. Is honestly very Scott Dixon. Scott Dixon, you look at a race like, I think it was Road America race 1, qualified, I don't know, 7th, something like that. I think Scott passed 1 car on track and he won the race.
Yeah.
He knew he didn't have to be super aggressive and go wheel to wheel with these guys. He knew how the races unfold. He knew what to do strategy wise. The team is obviously phenomenal in calling strategy and in the pit stops, but his pace on in and out laps and through the whole pit sequence is incredible. And he raced his way up to the front without having to put himself and his car in a lot of risky situations. And that's what he is so good at.
Well, it's interesting that a driver like Herta, during the season, like last year, there isn't a lot of time to kind of sit back and reflect and think, what do I need to do here? You would think, okay, it's spread out over 8 months or whatever it is. There's a week or 2 between races. There's enough time. But I think actually that the off season, and maybe even this one with a longer off season, probably even gave him more time to really think about, what do I need to do? And maybe it's because us race drivers are not the brightest people. It takes us a little while for things to sink in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. I think there may have been some benefit to that, but then the kind of flip side to it, which I think makes what he's done this season that much more impressive, is you look at what's happened to the weekend schedules, right? With these condensed schedules, you sometimes have 1 practice session heading into the qualifying, heading into the race, all in the same day. So you don't have, a night to sleep on it, let it marinate for a night and come back, and you always feel better the next day. You have to unload, and you've got 1 hour to make the right decisions on, which direction you want to go with the car. And you've got to think about what the car needs for qualifying and already think about what the car needs for the race, what it needs on black tires versus what it needs on red tires. That's a lot to ask of even a lot of seasoned guys. Never mind a younger driver that's only got 1 season under his belt.
But I'm sure he's done a lot of that mental prep before he even got there, because going in, he's thought about it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, he's and he's definitely one of those drivers that you can't get into his head. He grew up kind of racing. His really formative years in Formula cars were in Europe. And, as we know, and I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard, the atmosphere and the environment over there is much more, it's much more cutthroat. I mean, not that the competition on track here is any less, fierce, but the off track, and the mind games and the trickery that you hear about over there. So he's grown up mentally, I think, very strong. I don't think he gets rattled very easily by other people, by his own mistakes, by himself. I don't think he gets in his own head. And I think that sort of cool, calm approach has helped in a time where a lot of guys are kind of like panicking because, we only have 1 session. We have to accomplish X, Y, Z, and he and his engineer are actually really similar personalities. They're fun to watch because they're both just kind of like, yeah, okay, I guess we'll just, we got this done. We didn't get this done. We'll figure it out, and I think it's a really good approach. And it keeps driving fun, kind of like what we talked about before. It just they don't sweat the small things, which is in this situation a positive. The devil's in the details. That's in your preparation. And then on the weekend itself, I think you have to let some of that small stuff go and accept we have a limited amount of time. Let's hit the big things and get on with the job.
So you touched on earlier on about how your work ethic and your you like to look at things and just dig into it and get better at stuff. Are you do you love looking at data? Do you love digging into that and really looking and figuring that out, and that's how you get faster?
Yeah, I love data. I love looking at data. I wish that the data systems that exist now in karting existed when I was a kid, because I'd have been a much better karter, I think, if I had had that. But I always try to have my own computer at the track with all the info on it, because I know the engineers have so much to do in between sessions. I like just being able to sit there and looking at Pi by myself, and by this point I've had a lot of experience with knowing what to look for, and I just think it's such a useful tool to get yourself better, and especially when you're on a team with a bunch of good drivers, you can learn so much from looking at that stuff.
So how do you make that switch though? Because I see a lot of drivers who are very, very analytical, and they get in the car and they just keep thinking. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
There comes a point where you kind of got to switch that off and just drive. How do you do that? How do you make that switch?
So for me, it's kind of a muscle memory thing, right? So what I do is I go through the data, I go through the video, and I make this little sort of mental checklist. And you do a little bit of visualization. And, for me, it's useful to kind of watch my own onboard, and at the parts of the track where I need to make an adjustment, think, okay, here I'm going to do this differently. Here I'm going to do this differently. And you kind of just watch it a bunch. You say it a bunch. You try to let it absorb. And then what I do with my last preparation for a session is I go take a nap. And for me, what that does is it lets everything just sort of sink in. And when I wake up, I just know, I was like, all right, I wake up, all I have to do now is drive the race car. Everything else is done. Whatever improvements I'm going to make, I've already made them. They don't happen from this point forward. They've happened up to this point as far as I'm concerned. And so, yeah, you get in the car and you just drive without thinking too much about the things that you were looking at, back in the engineering trailer. You hope that you've watched it enough and said it enough that it's kind of ingrained, and then that little nap just sort of clears my mind. Some people, they meditate. That's kind of my meditation. It's just I close my eyes for 15 minutes and it just clears my head, and then I just get in the car and go drive.
Well, there's a ton of research around that if you visualize, put something in your mind beforehand, and then you sleep, your brain is consolidating that information while you're sleeping. So you're not the only driver that I know of that has a little nap before getting in the car. I've had a couple of I had a co-driver at Daytona one year where we actually physically would have to wake him up and say, okay, get in the car, and he'd be like stumbling to the car almost, and they would, and this was a guy who'd actually done some F1 stuff as well, so that's big stuff. How can I ask, how do you use visualization?
In what sense?
I guess, how deliberate are you? Do you kind of go, okay, right now I'm going to focus on visualizing this technique or this track or the way I'm going to be at this event, or like you were talking about, even, I see myself coming up to this qualifying, we're going to do this, in the race we're going to run reds and then black. So do you visualize all that, or is it a little bit more just, more casual, I guess?
Yeah, when I do visualization, it's a little more kind of specific, right? It's when I'm trying to adjust a certain thing. So I don't necessarily visualize the weekend as a whole. I'll kind of do visualization. Anything pre-event is again largely just looking at video, and if you've raced there the year before, I'll have a laundry list of notes from the post-event report on what I learned, because I always find that you can go through your practice sessions and your qualifying and all the rest of it, but by the end of 80, 90, 100, 300 laps, depending on what track you're at, you find things and you find little tricks and little techniques and little things that weren't evident in the 5 lap runs that you were doing in practice. And so, I go through all my notes from the year before, and that's kind of my first thing is, I'll do that. I'll go through some onboard video and point some stuff out to myself and kind of program that in. And then it's largely just after each session, I'll go through the data first, see where I need to improve based on, timing, scoring reports, or what I'm seeing from my teammates, watch some onboard video and kind of put that mental checklist in there. And that's largely, how I utilize visualization.
Hey, so what are the mental game for me is kind of my sweet spot when it comes to coaching. And one of the things that I believe is every driver loses focus when they're driving a car. Scott Dixon, Lewis Hamilton, whoever, right? They lose their focus just as much as anybody else. The best are just way better at regaining it. And if you take that to an extreme, back when you or I or anybody else were beginning their racing career, we would lose our focus, and it might take us 2 laps to regain it. And then we get better at, okay, now we lost our focus here. We got it back by the next corner. But a guy like Dixon or yourself or Rossi or whoever, loses focus, and it's almost immediate that you regain it. Do you have a process to regain your focus? Do you go, no, I've never lost focus in the car?
Oh, I've definitely lost focus in the car. So for me, it's 2 very, very simple things, and they're little kind of just tricks that I picked up working with, different coaches over the years. And, I worked with one coach for a large part of my junior Formula career that helped me immensely, on the mental side of it. And we kind of came up with a saying that I could just repeat to myself if I ever felt like I was in the wrong spot or losing focus or, like mentally not in the right zone. And, we would practice saying that and, doing kind of some mental exercises to stay back in that zone. And so on track, I can just utter those words to myself, and it just clocks my brain back into what we're doing and what we need to be doing. And so that, that's what I use if it's a situation where, you're on a long stint, you're kind of driving around by yourself, maybe. It's something that I use if I'm kind of in a defense mode. If there's a guy behind me and I'm like, okay, all I have to do is not make a mistake. It's, just hit your marks. And, I say that to myself, and it just kind of keeps your mind hyper focused on what you need to do. The other thing that we worked a lot on was, compartmentalizing emotion. And, some drivers are really good at getting punted on lap 1 and driving angry, and it's the best driving they'll ever do. I'm not a great angry driver, so I'm a great calm driver. And so I would practice, he's like, if you're driving down the road and a guy cuts you off or somebody does something stupid in front of you, practice not getting angry. Practice brushing it off and completely forgetting about it 1 second later. And it seemed like a silly exercise at the time, but I started doing it just driving my road car and in other areas in life too, where I would just learn to compartmentalize emotion, especially like anger or rage or displeasure, like immediately. And so now if a guy chops you or a guy punches you or a guy does something, untoward in the car, rather than, getting angry and driving revengefully, you just let it go. Pretend like it didn't happen. He didn't do this to you. This is just something that happened, and you can't change it now, so there's no point being upset about it. And that was something that helped me a lot when I was younger. And I'll openly admit, I went through a phase of my career where I lost that ability a little bit. I was not as good at it as I once was, and it took me a minute to realize that I had lost that. And then I started working very hard on getting that back. And I think it's helped me again, Tremac. I saw it help me when I was young. I didn't see my decline as in those situations as it sort of happened. But then once I acknowledged it and recognized it and went back, I immediately saw the benefits. So those kind of 2 tricks are something that I, developed very early in my career and still to this day try to use every time I'm in the race car.
That's cool, and thanks for sharing that, because that's I'll tell you what my, I call them triggers,
Yeah.
and my trigger actually in both those situations is car dancing. To me, when you're
Okay.
driving the car, and maybe you can identify to this with better than some, is it's just you're dancing with the car, and it's magic, right? And somebody can cut me off. You're right. I mean, I can be driving in traffic on the road. Somebody can cut me off, flip me off, whatever, and I can just go car dancing, and it puts me into that state, and I'm just like, that's magic time. So. So can you, and then I'll let you get going here, because I know you got a billion things to do. You're not the as we were joking about, you're not the kind of guy to be sitting around going, what am I going to do today? But tell us about your best race, and maybe the whole I was totally in the zone. What was that like? Can you describe that?
Oh man,
Because
it's
you're really good at describing this stuff, so I want to hear your words of this. So
it's funny, when you think of what you classify as your best race, right?
yeah,
I think there are different ways to kind of define it, but the one of the ones that really stands out for me was I'm trying to pick one now, because I'm kind of between two, and they were somewhat different situations. I'll go with the first one. So in 2013, I won the IndyCar race at Iowa, and I think I led like 246 of 300 laps. Like, it was a just dominating performance, and I had never experienced that in my IndyCar career. I'd watched guys like Scott Dixon have that happen to him seemingly every other week. Just you start up front, you get the lead, you never look back. Your pit stops are flawless. Everything's just fine. Everything was just fine. And I've always kind of had this. It's just so funny. This is a weird thing to admit, because I know it's so counterintuitive to what a lot of performance coaches and mental coaches will tell you, but I'm just different, and I established this with my coach when I was young, and it's still true today. I'm like a glass half empty kind of guy on the racetrack. So if things are going well, I just assume something's wrong is going to go wrong. And I'm not one of these guys that gets in the car being like, I'm the best. The rest of these guys suck. There's no way they can beat me. I'm just better than all them. Every time I've tried that approach, and I've seen guys do it and it works great for them, and every time I've tried it, I've inevitably driven like a jackass and had a terrible race. Every time I go into a race respecting the hell out of everybody around me and thinking, hey, this guy's really good in this situation, this guy's going to be good on this thing, and this guy's going to be really great in this corner, that's when I seem to up my level, rather than thinking everyone else is below me. I think everyone else is better than me, and it forces me to be better to compete. And so, that race in Iowa, by all accounts, it was a flawless execution from the whole team. I'm not trying to pump my own tires up here. It was just a great day for the team. The car was awesome. Strategy was perfect. Pit stops are great. And the whole time I was just like, well, this is going to end any minute. Something's going to happen. Yellow's going to screw me. Something's going to break. I'm going to, lap car is going to take us out. Something's going to happen. And I just drove around in this like constant state of like fear and negative energy in a way. Like we were untouchable. It was such a bizarre feeling. And I even had it my first IndyCar win at St. Pete. It was late in the race. There was a restart with about 20 to go. And I restarted second. I passed Elio for the lead on the restart. And I thought, great. And like I said, it was the first race of my, I guess third season, second with Andretti. And first race of the season, and I'm leading with 20 to go. And I'm like, damn it, I really wish he hadn't made that mistake, because second would have been my best result up to that point, right? It would have been great to just finish second behind Elio, would have been a great result. But now I'm leading, and now I'm going to be the guy that gave up the lead on the last stint with less than 20 to go at St. Pete, because it's a 3-time St. Pete winner behind me. He's in a Penske. He's Elio Castroneves. He's on better tires than me. Like, this race is like, I wish I never led, so that way I never had to say I gave up the lead at the end of the race, And so I just drove expecting him to go by me at any moment. and I kept him behind me the entire time, and we won the race. It's this really backwards way that my mind works, but I've at least established that's how it works, and that's how it works for me. And so yeah, my best race was a terrible 2 hours where I was just constantly worried for the next thing to go wrong.
Well, easy now to look at that and go, well, there's a reason for all of that. And the first thing I always think of is every driver is different. Everybody's got a different way of getting there, right? But the other thing I think is, there's all this research about getting a zone and flow and everything where you have to feel challenged. And the second you start thinking, well, I've got these guys beat, you're not going to push as hard as you should. So maybe that half empty glass thing for you is what gives you that challenge that makes you push that extra little bit or work that little bit harder.
Yeah, I think it might.
And maybe not work hard, because I get the feeling that you work hard, but you know what I mean? You push that extra little bit. Yeah.
For sure. So it's it was an interesting revelation when we first sort of figured that out when I was younger, and it's amazing how many times it's cropped back up in my pro career.
Yeah. That's cool. Have you had a race where you went, man, that was just incredible the way I drove, but you finished 7th or whatever?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, when you get into, this level of competition, right? And every weekend, and this is something I've actually tried to pitch to the people at NBC, is every weekend there's a drive of the day that is just not featured at all because they finished 7th, and it could be because something happened on the start, or maybe you had a bad qualifying, or you had a bad pit stop, whatever it is. But I mean, some of my best performances in my mind were, 5th, 6th, 7th place finishes, and nobody knows what you did except your team, except your crew guys and your engineers are the only, like, you come in, you're high fiving like, man, I can't believe we pulled that off, But when you're at this level, any small thing going wrong is probably going to take you out of winning the race, unless you're Scott Dixon.
Yeah.
But because there's just you're up against 23, 24 super competitive drivers with super capable teams and really good car. Like, the level is just so close now. So you really have to execute on absolutely every aspect to win a race. But if something does go wrong, how you recover from that it's all in the recovery mindset, is so important. And those are the kind of days that win championships. That one you said about Scott getting knocked off in the first lap and coming back to finish 5th, that's the kind of stuff that wins you a championship. And those are the drives you can be, almost more proud of, because you had to overcome more than the race where you start on pole and you lead every lap and you win the race.
So I got to ask, and I said I was going to wrap it up here, but I got to ask this question because we've talked about Dixon so much, and every IndyCar driver talks about Dixon, and it's almost like he's won because they all know he's going to win. How much of that do you think is real? Like, I've heard Will Power or whoever. I mean, Alex and guys talk about him as if, he's like this god, and he's probably sitting back there just kind of laughing, going, man, if they only knew.
So here's the thing. It's a very interesting point, because it's like we sort of talked about earlier, right? About the driver that wants to just lead every session and demoralize the whole field into, just accepting that guy's going to win. That's obviously not Scott's approach. We as a group collectively have given him this title of the undefeatable Scott Dixon. He's the most humble guy you're ever going to meet for his success, but you rarely see Scott win races that, I got to think of how to word this, that other guys just kind of like. So Road America race 1 this past year, right? Like I said, he passed one car on track. Yeah. Will Power was leading, Scott was second. Scott tried to pass him. Will was very aggressive with him. He actually got on the radio at one point and said, if he wants to pass me, he's going to have to be willing to crash. He said that on the radio. And I don't know if the team relayed this to Scott or not, but like, Scott, he just kept himself out of bad positions, and he had his one really good go at Will. Will was absolutely unwilling to let him by. because beating Scott Dixon is so hard, and it's such a good feeling when you do it. And so Scott sat back and was like, okay, he's going to race like that. That's fine. And then he got him in the pit stop. So it wasn't Will accepting that Scott was going to win. It was bad luck on Will's part, or
Right.
you could argue good luck on Scott's part, or
Right.
whatever it is. So it's not that the aura around Scott intimidates the rest of us to the point where we just sort of, bend over and let him take it. He's just so good at being in the right place at the right time. And yeah, is there an element of luck? For sure. Some of them, there's an element of luck, but and he's the first to admit it where were we? Was it? I'm trying to remember now. I don't remember now. He's somewhere. Maybe it was Road America. And he caught a lucky yellow to kind of get him in that. And he's the first to be like, yeah, we caught the lucky yellow. Or like those guys made a mistake. My crew was great in pit lane. But he's the common denominator here, right? Like he's always putting himself in a position to capitalize on other people's mistakes or to open up the strategy in a way that, allows you to try something different and maybe get ahead. So it is obviously a tremendous team effort, but at the same time, he's so good at putting himself in those positions. But I don't think, to your point, that he's kind of intimidated the group with his success to the point where we let him win. We all try very hard week in and week out to beat Scott Dixon, because even if you finish fifth, if Scott Dixon finished sixth, you did something right that day. Like that's where he's at.
Well, it's interesting you talk about luck, and obviously a lot of his luck comes from the fact that he's driving for Genesys and that team, and and then you flip that around and go, but why are they so good? Well, part of it is what Dixon has done for that team in terms of motivating them and all that other stuff, but that's a whole other conversation as well. So hey James, thanks for taking the time to do this. This has been really fun chatting with you, and hopefully we'll see you at a track somewhere one of these days, and keep having fun out there.
Yes, sir. Really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.
Imagine excellent driving information for free. Imagine asking any question and having it personally answered by Ross in real time. Yes, it can happen. Ross presents Chalk Talks every now and then. Check out the Speed Secrets website for announcements of the next Chalk Talk. These are online question and answer sessions where Ross will tackle any and all of your questions and topics. The Chalk Talks are fun, and you can join the community for a virtual hangout with your Speed Secret friends. And it's a way to keep learning and having fun.